All right, Lone Cleaner is back, and today we're going to look at a fairly medium level rum, almost a bottom feeder, from the company of Goslings that is based in Bermuda. Goslings has been around for quite a long time. Ever since in 1806, James Gosling, the son of a wine and spirits merchant in England, sailed over, meaning to get to Virginia, but the letters of marque and commercial enterprise and licenses and so on all expired by the time he got over, so he just decided to jump ship in Bermuda in St. George's, and he opened up a shop. And like most of these merchant traders, they kind of like bought and sold barrels and what have you. But in 1860, they started blending rums of their own. And of course, they called it Goslings, the old rum, because, they just started blending and putting it together and so on. And it's important to realize that they didn't do it they didn't grow sugarcane, or if they did, it wasn't commercial quantities to produce enough molasses to do on the island. So in 1863, they first introduced the old rum. And at that time, they were selling this stuff in barrels, and people would just go and with their own bottles or their flagons or their canisters or whatever, and they'd fill it right from there. Which is, by the way, until very recently, was very much the way the former Soviet Union used to sell its alcohol, especially beer, but I digress. So the First World War was a seminal time for the company, because by then, the company, still family owned, was still in the blending and bottling business in St. George's, and they decided that they were going to use champagne bottles that they liberated from the offices, the British officers' mess, and they started to put their rums into that and sell them as such, so people didn't have to come with their own containers and dip from barrels, right? They could just go out there and get their stuff done and buy the bottle the way it is now. So that became a thing. And the next thing that happened, of course, is that instead of having this kind of screw top, they started to seal the bottle with black wax, right? And that actually looks something like this, you see? So they kind of didn't diversify very much into different kinds of rum, but they certainly did well enough for them to have a really good market. And then I guess prohibition kind of created some problems for them. But in 1948, they registered the Black Seal brand, and they also put an actual seal on the bottle, but it really was as a consequence of the sealing wax, not any marine animal of that kind. And the company's still going strong, and they kind of like were a standard back when I started 15-20 years ago. What I mean by that is that, there were certain standard rums that you could find just about everywhere, whether it was Flor de Cana, whether it was Appleton, whether it was the Mount Gay Eclipse series, or, anything from Mount Gay for that matter. There was the Bounty rums from St. Lucia. There was the El Dorados up and down the range and so on. And, there was a few of those, one of them being Goslings, or Puslers for that matter, from the British Virgin Islands. So Goslings never really said what they put into their rums. In that sense, you could almost argue they were like the British Navy. You just never were sure. But what I've noticed now, since I've come to Toronto, I'm spending some time here, and I went to visit my good friend Robin Wynn, who runs this bar that I'm actually in called Little Sisters. And if you like rum, you really got to come here and spend some time with the guy. He might not spend much time with you, but his rums will, and he's got quite a lot of them. So, highly recommended you come and spend a few hours in his company. But in any case, he had a fair amount of Goslings in stock, and one of them was the 151. Now, 151s are famous in their own right for various reasons having to do with the Tiki revival in the post-war years after 1940, and they were 75.5%. The reason why they were that strong, the reason why that was chosen had a lot to do with past history. There is actually an essay, which I'm going to link to the show notes, that goes into more detail on this subject. The thing is, though, it's 75.5%, and it's kind of like worth taking a look at. You'd think that this is a bottom feeder, right? Because they do have rums that are slightly more upscale, whether it is the single barrel expression or whether it is the family reserve, old, new, annual, whatever, the rye cask and so on. But they do have good ones, and this one is not one of them. This is considered to be basically just a barman's mixing staple. I do submit, however, that there is more to this than you might think at first sight. Yeah. There's caramel in it, of course. There's smoke, and then there's some tannins. There's a little bit of plasticine and turpentine and furniture polish and so on. But you know, it actually smells not too bad, because after you let it stand for a while, you'll get a little bit of spices. There's a little bit of cinnamon and burnt sugar and even cardamom if you really want to. And of course, prunes, raisins, that sort of thing. It is sharp. There's just no way of getting around that. It's 75.5%. And while it's not exactly going to hurt you, it has to be treated with a little bit of respect. Tasting it now, let's take a look at that. Yeah, you got to be careful with this one. It's actually quite dry. It's almost bitter at times, like chocolate or coffee grounds that have been left standing too long. You know, wet coffee grounds that have long since passed their expiry date. You know, there's the same cinnamon, smoke, leather, caramel, toffee, dried prunes, a little bit of citrus, just a tad, a little bit of anise in there, and so on. And the caramel and the toffee and so on. Now, the real question then arises is what are we doing with this rum, and what should we score it as? Honestly, this can't score more than 80, 83 points maximum. And I've written the review already, but I haven't really assigned a score to it because I'm still kind of testing it out and thinking my thoughts through on the matter. But by the time this goes up, I'll be able to put it in the show notes, so you'll be able to see exactly what I think. What I don't like about the rum has nothing to do with its taste and has nothing to do with how it smells or its strength or anything like that, or even the color, because I mean, it really is quite dark, right? This is E150 caramel coloring that's been added to give it that misleading impression of long aging. It's supposed to be 3 years old and aged in charred barrels, but where that takes place, how long do they filter it? I know nothing of this, and that's the real problem. We know not a fucking thing about this thing, this bloody rum. In other words, we don't know where the raw stock comes from, right? We don't know whether it is distilled on the island or elsewhere, and if it's done elsewhere, which distillery did it, what was it based on, what was the fermentation time, which country was this all done in, and where did the aging take place? We know none of this, nothing. And it's a real pain in the ass in this day and age, even on the website of the company, because you're sure as shit ain't getting anything from the label of the bottle aside from the strength and the fact that it's from Bermuda. They got to do better than this. Right? So I think it's actually a decent sipper, and I'm not going to let my displeasure at its lack of disclosure sway my mind on this, but I do want to point out that in 2025, we really shouldn't have to deal with this shit. And this is something that I'm going to come back to over and above that in all the other stuff that I'm going to say. So look for the score in the blurb, right? And take it from me. It's worth a sip. It's worth a drink. You'd want to mix it. It's kind of like a real strong thing, but don't let that stop you from trying it just once to see whether it can pass muster for you. And that's pretty much it for right now. I will let you go, and thanks for listening. We'll talk some more about Goslings later.